The early history of South Africa is complex and fascinating. This southern tip of Africa has been home to various peoples and seen many changes over the centuries. Let's start at the very beginning, over 100,000 years ago. South Africa was inhabited by very early humans. Scientists have discovered some of the oldest remains of anatomically modern humans, dating back over 200,000 years in South Africa. These hunter-gatherer peoples are known as the San. The San lived across southern Africa, moving with the seasons to find food and water. They gathered plants, hunted animals, and left behind incredible rock art depicting their lives. These San peoples lived in small, nomadic bands across the region for tens of thousands of years. Around 2,000 years ago, another group of people known as the Khoikhoi migrated into the region. The Khoikhoi were pastoralists, meaning they raised livestock. Most famously, they raised cattle and became known as the Khoikhoi, which means people of the cow. The Khoikhoi settled across South Africa, living in larger, more established tribal groups. The San and Khoikhoi were the main inhabitants of South Africa for centuries. But in the 1600s, things began to change with the arrival of Dutch sailors. In 1652, Dutch traders arrived on the coast, establishing a stopover point for ships sailing to Asia. This stopover point would become the city of Cape Town. The Dutch claimed the area for the Dutch East India Company, calling it the Cape Colony. Why did the Dutch settle here? It provided a convenient stopping point along trade routes to Asia. The Cape had a temperate climate and abundant fresh water. Lands surrounding the Cape were fertile and could be used for farming to supply ships with fresh produce. At first, contact between Dutch colonists and native peoples like the San and Khoikhoi was mostly peaceful and involved trade. However, over time, colonists expanded the settlement and began seizing more land, displacing local groups. This led to conflict, including the Khoikhoi-Dutch Wars of the 1700s. The Dutch enforced colonial expansion, leading to conquest of the Cape interior. The Dutch became the rulers of the Cape Colony. Colonists were granted large farms, and the colony began to grow through the 1700s and into the 1800s. This growth was further propelled by new colonists like the French Huguenots escaping persecution in Europe. The Dutch also imported slaves from East Africa, Madagascar, and Asia to provide farm labor. The mingling of various cultures would influence the diversity of South Africa today. By the late 1700s, Great Britain had taken notice of the strategic importance of the Cape Sea route. Conflict between British and Dutch colonists culminated in the Cape Colony being seized by the British in 1795. This was a major turning point, as British rule would now shape the future development of South Africa. Let's pause here before continuing on to discuss British colonization and how the struggles over land, resources, and power in early South Africa shaped the complex history that was to unfold over the next centuries. What aspects stand out to you so far about the beginnings of South African history? After seizing the Cape Colony from the Dutch in 1795, the British worked to strengthen their hold on the region. The Cape served as an important stopping point on British trade routes to India and Asia. In the early 1800s, the Cape Colony was still relatively small, with colonist expansion limited to the coastal area around Cape Town. However, conflict was brewing between the British and the Xhosa people on the eastern frontier. The Xhosa had been displaced from their lands by European settlers pushing out from the Cape. Between 1789 and 1879, the Xhosa and British fought 9 brutal frontier wars, as Xhosa leaders like Chief Nkika resisted colonial expansion. At the same time, British colonial governors encouraged further settlement by British colonists to the east and north of Cape Town. This led to the Great Trek in the 1830s and 1840s. Thousands of Dutch descent Boer farmers, or voortrekkers, disgruntled with British rule, migrated north and east into the interior. This migration inland marked a major expansion of European colonization in southern Africa. The Boers set up independent republics like the Transvaal and Orange Free State outside British control. The Boers fought wars against indigenous African peoples like the Zulu, taking their land. Legendary Zulu leader Shaka repelled early Boer incursions but was eventually defeated by expanding colonial power. Throughout the 1800s, British power strengthened through economic and military dominance in the region. With the discovery of diamonds and gold, more colonists flooded in, establishing major cities like Johannesburg. indigenous African kingdoms were systematically conquered by colonial forces. The British and Boers struggled between themselves for control of land and resources. In 1910, Britain succeeded in uniting the various colonies and Boer republics under the Union of South Africa, which became a self-governing British dominion. The Union institutionalized white minority rule and racial segregation through measures like the 1913 Native Land Act, which reserved most land for the white population. Over the next decades, segregation and disenfranchisement of black South Africans intensified under apartheid, leading to the anti-apartheid struggle and first democratic elections in 1994 under Nelson Mandela. The long history of colonialism, dispossession of land, migrant labor, racial laws, and repression of blacks under apartheid has shaped the diversity and inequality of modern South Africa. The country continues to grapple with these complex legacies today while seeking to build an equitable democracy. That brings us to the present. Hopefully, this overview provides greater context on the key events and figures spanning over 300 years that have made South Africa the complex, diverse nation it is today. Let me know if you have any other questions. Nelson Mandela emerged as one of the pivotal leaders in South Africa's transition from apartheid to democracy. He spent over 27 years imprisoned for his anti-apartheid activism. While in prison, Mandela became an international icon for the anti-apartheid struggle. He rejected violence and advocated for reconciliation between South Africa's divided communities. After his release in 1990, Mandela participated in negotiations to end apartheid with South African President F.W. de Klerk. This led to South Africa's first multiracial democratic elections in 1994. Mandela was elected the first black president of South Africa in these historic elections. During his presidency from 1994 to 1999, Mandela focused on transitioning the country to a constitutional democracy and healing the racial divides of the past. He established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate human rights violations under apartheid. Mandela advocated forgiveness and cooperation between white and black South Africans, though inequality and structural racism persisted. Nelson Mandela came to symbolize the long struggle for freedom and equal rights in South Africa. The values of justice, reconciliation, and human dignity that he championed continue to inspire people fighting oppression worldwide today. In conclusion, the history of South Africa has been profoundly shaped by the complex struggles over land, resources, and power between its indigenous peoples and European colonists. The arrival of the Dutch and British from the 1600s onward led to wars and the expansion of colonial control. The imposition of racial laws and forced segregation under apartheid caused immense suffering and fueled resistance. South Africa has come a long way to emerge as a democracy, but continues to grapple with the enduring legacies of dispossession and inequality. This history reveals an ongoing struggle for freedom, equality, and human rights in South Africa that leaders like Mandela advanced. The future course of this diverse nation remains unfolding.